The 2018 Michigan football team is going to be as good as it will let itself become. I'll explain what I mean by that next here on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's Michigan Podcast. Thank you for joining us here. So I got two different looks at the Wolverines this week. One in person. I was there at the Artist formerly known as Deace Stadium, now known as Ryan Field. And then I got a chance to come home and watch the game on television on the replay as well. And then I go back and, I take a look at Michigan's body of work so far. Because we as fans, even if we're knowledgeable ones, we can't help but look at things emotionally, right? And I'm like you. I was sitting there in the stands in Evanston, Illinois during that first quarter. I'm like, I drove all the way here with my 11-year-old son for this. I mean, this is dreck, man. I mean, this is dreadful. This is even worse than the first quarter against Notre Dame because I don't think this team is that good. And we haven't beaten a ranked team on the road since 2006. We've got one win over Ohio State in 15 years. We know all of these numbers. And for us as fans, or is it for we as fans? I'll just go with both just in case there's any grammar teachers watching. For us, we as fans, we can't help but let the body of that emotional baggage enter in to our assessment and analysis to some degree. And it becomes very difficult, therefore, for us to see a team as its own singular entity. When I was a kid, Michigan struggled a lot in the first half of games too. And then, Bo Schembechler would make his famous halftime adjustments and, Michigan would dominate the third quarter of a game and often go on and win. But this isn't the same program or same team that it was then. So we can't look back at those days for nostalgic purposes and say that they automatically translate to 2018. Similarly, we can't really look at Michigan's struggles on the road in recent years, even in the Harbaugh years, as much as the program has grown by leaps and bounds since he took over. This is one of the last remaining hurdles that he needs to clear. We can't look at what happened against Iowa in 2016, for example, and say, well, because that happened, I know this is going to happen in this game. A lot of these guys that are playing now didn't play on that team. I think we have a better quarterback now than we had then as well. So for us as fans, we have to, we can't just temper our positivity because of optimism. I think sometimes we have to temper our negativity because of pessimism as well, because again, it's difficult to avoid letting the full body of emotional baggage, one way or the other, enter into our analysis and look at an individual game or team as a singular entity apart from that. So I decided to do some research this week to put as much emotion aside as I could, because when I got back home from Evanston, Illinois, I was pretty much like, well, basketball practice started. Because I'm done with 8-4. I don't care about that. I don't care about 9-3. That doesn't do anything for me. I mean, if you're recruiting at the level we're recruiting at, you've got the amount of NFL talent on the field we're putting on the field. You have the expense of the coaching staff that we have. I just 8-4, 9-3. I know for some of you, man, that's it. You got your Jolly Rogers off of that. You're just going to sit around and enjoy the hell out of that holiday bowl trip. Not me. That for where our program should be now, considering the caliber of resources, recruiting, and coaching we have. I mean, that seems like more of a sentencing than a reward to me. And it's not that means we didn't do what we were supposed to do. And this isn't a team on a third string quarterback like last year's team. So I know some of you get frustrated with me because of that. And I don't really care. I just, that's where I'm at. I'm not going to tell you how to be a fan. Don't tell me how to be one. If you're a fan that's content with 8-4, 9-3, that's cool. I'm not. Especially now, year 4 into having who I think is a pretty damn good football coach, because his record says that it is. I think we can be and do better, and we should be. So I'm looking at what's preventing us from taking that next step. So I start setting my emotion aside because my frustration sets in, all that past emotional baggage of previous losses I still haven't gotten over, come back into the memory banks, right? And you start looking at this moment differently. So move all that aside and let's look at some data, because our emotions are variables, but the data is the constant here, all right? Here's what the data shows. Now, yards per play. Let me explain why this is an important stat. Handicappers and data analytics guys, this is their number one statistic. Why? Because they're looking for constants, not variables too. They're looking for consistent markers, because you can't handicap that it's just a team's random year to be plus 10 in turnovers and the ball bounces their way. You can't handicap that. You can't handicap that a team's on his third string quarterback. You can't handicap that Trevor Lawrence gets, a neck injury in the first quarter against Syracuse, and now they can't cover a 25-point spread. You can't handicap that. And you assume that level of risk when you go into this. So you're looking for the things that you know you can count on. And yards per play is where these aren't fluky events. That over the course of a game where you're executing 60 to 85 plays or more, how are you doing? And then what are you doing against the opposition? So I went back and looked at how Big Ten teams have done so far this year in this stat. I threw out all the FCS competition, and then I looked at the differential, meaning what's the difference in yards per play from what you are gaining and what you are giving up. Here are the numbers. Number 1 is Michigan at 3.1 yards per play. Folks, that's elite. I mean, that would be an Alabama-like number. Penn State at 2.47. You see Wisconsin and Maryland. Maryland's our next opponent. Their numbers are interesting. They've got games where they're plus 3 or 4 yards per play, which is great. And then games where they're in the hole, which is indicative of the up and down nature of their team. I know some people will be a little surprised to see Ohio State fifth at 1.72, but they've already played several Power 5 games. They've played 2 teams. TCU was technically a road game. I'd call it more of an away game because it was on a quote-unquote neutral site with a lot of Ohio State fans there. But still, playing away from home against TCU and Penn State is better than anybody else has done. So I think you're going to see their number go up. And I think Michigan's number is a little inflated because of the softness of the schedule. But even over the course of the rest of the season, if Michigan goes down a half yard or even a full yard to 2.1 yards per play for the season, you ought to be contending for a Big Ten championship with that number. And I went back and looked at last year. In fact, you look there on the right. Top 5 most dominant games thus far. Again, in yards per play differential, Ohio State was a +7 against Rutgers. That's, JV versus the varsity stuff. Penn State nearly got there against Kent State. And then you see 2 of the most dominant 5 games this year. Michigan against Western Michigan, who looks like one of the better teams in the MAC. And Michigan against Nebraska. Well, Steve, Nebraska's not that good. You know what? If you take the Michigan game out of Nebraska's number there, So for the season, Nebraska is a 0.31 in the red in yards per play differential. You take the Michigan game out, they're a full yard in the positive. That team should not be winless. I think there's a culture issue with Scott Frost and his team where they're not buying in, but I'll let Nebraska podcast worry about that. We got, we're trying to do our own thing right now here on Michigan podcast. So when you look at those numbers, and I went back and I looked at through 5 games last year, Michigan's yards per play differential per game was 1.84. That's an incredible improvement. That's an incredible improvement. We have declined our sacks per game by a full sack per game so far. Again, that's an outstanding improvement. When I looked at our third down conversion percentage through 5 games last year, it was 36%. It's 46% right now. Our offense is converting 46% of our third downs. I mean, again, that's getting it done. I mean, I think by any reasonable measure, the things that we thought were weaknesses coming in, our coaching staff have addressed those things. The numbers are there because I was trying to figure out too, like, why do these analytics like ESPN's FPI and SB Nation's Bill Connolly, they've got us ranked 5th, 6th, 7th in the country. What are we missing, right? Because, we're watching sluggish starts against SMU. We're down 17-0 to Northwestern. That's the biggest road comeback in school history, except for when we were down, 28-7 to Minnesota in 03 on a Friday night. Came back and won that game up in the old Metrodome, which, by the way, that was the last time Michigan won an undisputed Big Ten championship, if you can believe it, 15 years ago. So, as fans, we can't help but have all that emotional baggage come back to the fore and see everything as a holistic block of a series of unfortunate events, if you will, rather than a singular team and a singular game. But as a singular team, the fundamentals are there for this to be a championship team. You have a yards per play differential that is 3 yards better than your opposition on average per week. That's just dominance. Right now, ESPN's FPI has our defense ranked. I think it's 7th in defensive efficiency. We're 11th in special teams efficiency, and our offense is 20th in offensive efficiency. You've got all 3 units in the top 20 in the country in efficiency. That looks like a team that ought to be contending for the college football playoff. And so you start looking at you do this from the outside in first. You got to look at the fundamentals. The fundamental things that need to be in place, the cornerstones that need to be in place to show the essentially the overall metric and analytic of a championship team. And because if you don't have those, then there's no point in even doing further analysis, right? So clearly with the numbers I've laid out for you here this week on Michigan Podcast, the Wolverines have those. So then you got to ask yourself, why are we doing this? And that's when you start now moving inward and you start looking at the internal and the little things. Against Northwestern, we were minus 85 in penalty yards. Now, if I had come on here on Michigan Podcast last week and told you that in the last 3 quarters against the Wildcats, Michigan would outgain them 346-97 and would have no turnovers in the game, what would you tell me the score is? 31-10, which is about what I predicted the game to be. That's what kind of thing. But when you're minus 85 in penalty yards, and yeah, I know we're all up in arms about that really odd holding call on Karan Higdon, but the drive before that, Northwestern should have gotten a pass interference call on David Long on a 3rd down that would have given them a 1st down. So that kind of balanced itself out in the end. This year, Michigan has given teams 15 3rd down conversions via defensive penalties, guys. That's Detroit Lions-esque kind of stuff. That's just beating yourself. The penalties, the lack of I know fans hate hearing LOE, lack of execution from coaches, but guys, our coaches have shaved our sacks per game almost in half. Our yards per play differential is almost double. Our 3rd down conversion percentage is 10% higher than last year. If I've got no problem. Jimmy, I love Jimmy as a child, but I got no problem criticizing the coaches. You've seen that. That's getting it done. That doesn't mean I like every play call or this or that, but again, they're not robots. They're going to make mistakes too. By and large, the coaches have done what they were supposed to do heading into this season, given what we saw last year. I think this now becomes about those guys sitting over there on the other side of me wearing the helmet. They got to stop beating themselves. I mean, Sean McKeon dropping that ball, he's wide open. That would have been a scoring drop. And there's nobody, and I don't know what it looked like on TV, but that was literally right underneath me at the game. There was no one within 10 yards. Just a drop, man. Can't do that. Yep, blocks in the back that aren't necessary on punts when you're on the other side of the field. And he did block him in the back. Why are you doing that? What you doing? Right? What are you doing? It's like the holding call on Michigan on that screen pass to De'Veon Smith against Ohio State in 2016. That would have won the game. And it was holding. It was way away from the play. I understand why we as fans are complaining, but there was no point to doing that. What you doing there? Why are you doing that? Where's your self-awareness? Nico Collins, you're catching a ball over the middle. You've got an easy route to just square your shoulders and go get a first down, and you run laterally like you did, when you were dominating Alabama high school competition. Why are you doing that? Coaches aren't coaching that stuff. When it comes time to criticize the coaches, and I do think we could be more aggressive in play calling, but the fundamental statistical metrics of a team that is set up to be successful are all there. So, I mean, in terms of just defensive yards per play, we're number one in college football, guys. Everything's there. Everything's there to be great. It now comes down to the guys wearing the winged helmet. It really comes down to this. Michigan, this football team, will be as good as it allows itself to be. Want to say thank you. We've landed several new Patreon supporters at Michigan Podcast since the season started. Thank you to those of you that are supporting us. And if you would like to, we want you to know that you get some exclusive content that we provide for you each week via Patreon, including my instant reaction post-game podcast, my picks for the Michigan game, pre-kickoff, and more. As a thank you to those of you that decide that you like what we do here at Michigan Podcast enough to support us at Patreon. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, joined now by my partner over at WolverineDigest.com, Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Go Blue, Michael. Good to have you back with us here this week. How are you?
I'm good, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And certainly an interesting game to talk about.
One of the things I talked about at the top of the show here this week is for fans, it's not just that we have to guard against overly rosy scenarios and optimism, but when you've been struggling for a while with your favorite team, you have to guard against overt pessimism as well. And it's hard not to have, like when we were kids and Michigan played poor in the first half, Schembechler was going to make those famous halftime adjustments, and the third quarter we'd come out and barnstorm them, right? We kind of knew that. But that was in 1987 and 1977, and that doesn't apply to 2017 and 2018. Likewise, when the team starts off slow on the road or does something bad, you think to Iowa 2016 or all of the baggage we have, and it all comes to the forefront. So when I got home from Evanston this weekend, I decided, I'm going to try to put as much of that emotion aside as I could, because that's the variable. I want to look at constants. I want to look at data. And does the data line up with my emotion? And here's what I found. What I found is an average yards per play differential so far, not counting FCS competition, meaning yards per play you're giving up to what you're gaining. Michigan's number one in the Big Ten at 3.1, and they're number one by like a half yard over Penn State. Our third down conversion percentage on offense is 10% higher than it was last year at this time, from 36 to 46%. When I looked at our sacks per game, we're down a full sack per game less than we were last year. Defensively, we're number one in yards per play in all of college football. In fact, I mean, a lot of the things that we talked about all offseason, coaches are doing. Coaches are addressing. You had the stat, Karan Higdon's got more big play runs than any running back in the Big Ten does right now. Right. We're watching that game against Northwestern and getting frustrated on all these first down runs, and you pointed out the first three quarters of the game before Northwestern dropped a safety in the box, we were getting 7 yards of crack running the ball on first down. The numbers say this is not last year, because last year we were 1.84 yards per play differential. We've nearly doubled it. The numbers say this should be a team that contends for a championship, all the fundamentals are there. And so you start looking at the little things, and it's drop balls, it's stupid penalties. And that's why I open up the show with this line, Michael. This team's going to be as good as it lets itself be. What do you think?
Well, the interesting thing, Steve, is if you look at this team now, they've played 5 games, they've played 20 quarters of football. They've played 3 bad quarters of football, really bad quarters of football out of those 20. All those numbers that you're rattling off make a lot of sense because of what they're doing in 17 out of those 20 quarters. But in those 3 quarters that they've been really bad, that's when they fell behind 21-3 to Notre Dame, and that's when they fell behind 17-0 to Northwestern. And that's what ended up costing them against Notre Dame, and that's what almost cost them against Northwestern because even though that they dominated the final 3 quarters against Northwestern, they had, as you said, some of those little tiny details, those little misplays, the dropped ball, the pass interference calls, some holding calls, one phantom, a couple that were legit, that they could not put the ball in the end zone like they needed to do so. And so really it's about 3 quarters of football this year that is maybe painting our perspective about what this Michigan football team is, because those 3 quarters have been so atrocious that Michigan has found themselves down and out on the road in some, in some big time moments. And so you're right. I think this team is as good as they want to be, but they've got to go out there and prove it in a couple of games and really in every game going forward, because Maryland's going to be a challenge. Wisconsin's going to be a legit team. Penn State could beat this Michigan football team. And, you can't afford to have a really bad quarter. You can lose a quarter. You can lose 2 quarters to some of those teams, but you can't have a god-awful, atrocious, abomination type of quarter and get away with it against those teams, because chances are you'll find yourself in a big hole and you won't be able to come back from it.
What's your best theory to what's going on in the first quarter of these road games? What do you think it is? And of course, if we knew absolutely, we'd be making $9 million a year, right? But
yeah, I mean,
we watch this team a lot. So what do you think?
Yeah, it might be a little bit of self-fulfilling prophecy. It might be a little bit of Michigan hearing all about the going on the road, and so they're playing Notre Dame, and if they're in those first few minutes and they're in their warm-ups and they're thinking like, hey, this is not going to be that game. This is not going to be that game. This is not going to be that game. You and I both know that. I mean, I've gone back to this comparison when I'm coaching my basketball team is if you go up to the free throw line and you're saying, I'm not going to miss, I'm not going to miss, I'm not going to miss, guess what? You end up missing. It's not going up there and saying, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it. And so I don't know what Michigan's players, their mentality is before these games, but if they've gone into Notre Dame and they went into Northwestern and said, this is not going to be like those last games, this is not going to be like those last games, that's a negative thought that you're having already. And you're already worried a little bit about it instead of saying like, hey, we're going to go out there and play our game and just do what we do best. Maybe that's part of it. I wish we were in the locker room. I wish we got to see those pregame speeches from Jim Harbaugh. I wish we got to see what these guys were doing mentally to get themselves prepared. Obviously, it hasn't impacted them for every game. I mean, they played pretty well against Wisconsin on the road last year in the first half until it went south in the second half. So it's not like this has been every single game they've come out and played flat in the first quarter. A lot of the games are just losing on the road, but they've actually played okay in the first quarter. These 2 games, though, I mean, it's been absolutely awful, and they've got to fix that, because if you let Michigan State, that crowd in East Lansing will be like the crowd at Notre Dame. If you let Michigan State's crowd get into it the way that Notre Dame was allowed to, I don't think you come back from that like you did against Northwestern.
Against Northwestern, Michigan had a 2.5 yard per play advantage. Unless you're like -3 in turnovers in college football, you should never lose a game. I mean, you have to really go out of your way with self-inflicted errors to lose a game where you have a 2.5 yard per play differential advantage over the opponent. And Michigan in the last 3 quarters, it was 346 to 97 was the yardage advantage against Northwestern. And yet Northwestern had the ball. Not with a realistic chance, but with some chance to tie or win the game with the final possession. That's, to me, where you've got to do, that's on you. Now, this isn't, listen, I know John Runyon's not great. I know Juwan Bushell-Beatty's not great. All right, that's not John Runyon Sr. and Shrezelle Jenkins out there. I get that, all right? But our offensive line is more than serviceable to win games from what I have seen. I think it just even looks better. The pockets that we form in play action passes, we couldn't even functionally do that last year. All right. Clearly, we've got a dramatically superior quarterback. The defense is better in some areas, not as good in some areas. But again, how much better are you going to be than number one in the nation in total defense, guys? All right. We're number one in the nation in total defense. This to me is, you've got to, and this is what I do like about Shea Patterson. I didn't think he was great on Saturday. I don't know what it looked like on TV. There were several guys that were open. He didn't even look at second receivers. Looked like it was kind of, my primary's not open. I wait, and then take off. But I loved his resourcefulness. He made plays with his legs that won us the game. But I really think this is about, and I know fans hate hearing lack of execution from their coaches because it sounds like an excuse. But, I know the coaches could do better. But, Michael, they've addressed a lot of the systemic issues we talked about. After a while, the guys wearing the helmets just got to go out there. Nico Collins, man, you got to get a first down. You can't run laterally like this is, Sylacauga High School in Alabama on a Friday night. I mean, you just got to do the stuff that you're coached to do.
No, I agree with you, and part of that comes back to your number one receiver is a sophomore in Donovan Peoples-Jones, and your number two is a sophomore in Nico Collins, and they haven't experienced a ton of it. But yeah, to me, like, that's kind of a weird excuse, because when you're even in high school, like, you've got to get a first down. Like, you're going into that, you're 3rd and 2, you're getting the screen pass, you've got to get the first down, and yet you're dancing like somehow you're going to deke this guy out of his jock and get the first down that way. I don't understand that. I don't understand, Sean McCune dropping that ball. I mean, that drops happen, but that's not the kind of play that typically drops happen. The play that typically drops happen is when you're sitting there back there and you got way too much time, or you're getting your hands on it. This is the ball that's coming right in his chest. That was inexcusable. And you're right. You've got to make those plays. I mean, David Long and Lavert Hill have not been as good in coverage. They've picked up way more pass interference penalties this year than last year because they're not getting their head turned around. They're not spotting the ball. They're not making a play on the football. I mean, these guys have got to start making some plays beyond what we've seen out of Ron Higdon and Shea Patterson, and help your quarterback out. I mean, we can go back to the Notre Dame game, the safeties being out-jumped for those 50-50 balls. I mean, guys have got to start making some plays, and you just can't do it against the easy teams on your schedule, like Nebraska and like Western Michigan. You got to do it against some of the better teams, and Northwestern turned out to be one of the better teams, and it really took a long time for Michigan to get going. And thank God for somebody like Shea Patterson, who is truly a difference maker from what the Wolverines had a year ago.
I go back, and we're not in the locker room. We're not around the team. But, we all assumed Chase Winovich was going to be voted captain of this team. And then he wasn't. And 2 juniors. I can't remember 2 juniors ever being captains at the same time at Michigan. Both great players, by the way. Devin Bush is probably the best player in the program if it's not Chase Winovich. But 2 juniors get voted captain instead. And I go back and right now, ESPN's FPI has us 11th in special teams efficiency, 7th in defensive efficiency, 20th in offensive efficiency in the country. Those are national title numbers when you're that good at all 3 phases. And I just think when I watched, Dwayne Haskins was 11 for 26 throwing the ball against Penn State when he wasn't throwing screen passes. 11 for 26. That's John O'Corn. Okay, terrible. And yet, their guys found ways to make plays. That there was a cultural expectation there that if they hung around long enough, the other guy would make the mistake and they would capitalize. That culture, we don't have that right now. And I think we got a lot of guys kind of sitting around waiting for someone to make that play. And Winovich came out in that 3rd quarter when they didn't block him, when they moved him inside. And they didn't block him, and he sacked Clayton Thorson. And that seemed to be the wake-up play, where a lot of guys say, okay, yeah, let's do this. And I do wonder, again, I'm not into letting coaches off the hook. You've heard me criticize them plenty of times. Hell, I've criticized John Beilein. He's the best basketball coach school's ever had. But I don't know how much better your coaches are going to do other than we're top 20 nationally in all 3 phases of the game. All right? I mean, they're human too. They're going to make some errors too. After a while, guys got to start realizing that you have to make those winning plays and not wait for somebody else to make them, Michael.
No, I agree with you, Steve, but I guess when it comes down to it, I mean, if you look at it like that, right, I mean, how long have we been talking about making those winning plays? We've been talking about making those winning plays for 4 years. So what's the common theme? Is it the players? No, the players kind of move on and go on. I mean, is it the coaches? Some of those coaches move on. Jim McElwain comes in, Sherrone Moore comes in, Tim Drevnos goes out. I mean, the common denominator is ultimately the guy at the top, and I don't know what you need to do as a head coach to instill that type of confidence in your players so that they go out there and make those plays. But something's maybe a little bit off, and maybe that's just part of the culture that when you're down for Michigan football like they have been for a decade, that gets lost a little bit. And so it's not passed down from generation to generation, from senior class to junior class, from junior class to sophomore class. And so those guys aren't ready because they haven't experienced it. They haven't had older guys that have shown them the way. And maybe that's what Jim Harbaugh is up against, and maybe that'll take longer than 4 years. Maybe that takes longer than 5 years. But I'll certainly say that we're not really going to be that patient to wait for 6 or 7 or 8 years. And something's got to change. And you're right, the players have to make plays. But if we're talking about the same, we're talking about Chase Winovich 4 years into his career not making the play, then I'd be like, damn, Chase, like, you got to go out there and do it. We're talking about different players every time, right? We're talking about different wide receivers. We're talking about different offensive linemen. We're talking about different quarterbacks. Now, Shea Patterson seems to be doing that. But we keep on talking about different players. The common theme is the only thing that is constant, and that's the coaching staff and the guy at the top.
I get the sense, Michael, he's trying to address this. That's why I think they've changed. That's why I think that taking the ball at the start of the game instead of deferring, as he's done his career and Michigan has done going back really since Bo Schembechler arrived here in 1969. That's kind of been our MO, except when Rich Rod was here, was to defer when you win the coin toss. I think that's why he's taking the ball. I think that's why he's coming out instead of pro sets and running the ball, coming out and trying to throw it, look more aggressive, trying to catch some mismatches. I think he's trying to figure out, are there game day decisions I'm making that may answer why we are leaving these opportunities behind? I think maybe those are his ways of trying to address it.
No, I think you could be right. I mean, certainly, I think both you and I, Steve, come from the same school a little bit on Jim Harbaugh, where we know what he's capable of. We know what he's trying to accomplish. I just think that, when things repeat themselves, when we had a caller on our show on Tuesday saying, well, look, like, why are we talking about history? Why are we talking about the road games? Why are we talking about what happened in years past? And I said, the reason we're talking about it is because it's reared its ugly head again this year. And if the same type of issues that have shown up in the past are showing up this year, then I'm just wondering what the breakthrough moment is. What's the turning point? What does Jim Harbaugh do as he's building all these different things and trying all these different things that puts his team over the top? And maybe we're still going to see it. Maybe coming back and winning on the road and beating Northwestern was that. But we've got to see it certainly against Wisconsin and Michigan State. And if he goes out there and wins those 2 games, I don't care if he wins by half a point in each of those games. If he goes out and does it, then maybe we can start talking about how the things that he's been doing behind the scenes are starting to pay off. But where we're sitting right here, Steve, as you well know, you're seeing a lot of the same leaks, that's a good way to describe it, the same leaks in the program, the same issues that they've had in the past. And so you're sitting there going, has he really changed it? Because we're seeing the same problems when Michigan can least afford them.
I'm glad you brought that up. So let me close by asking you about this, because you're there in Ann Arbor. I'm not. And we've got viewers and listeners all over the world for this, as do you. I listen online from Iowa, for example, where I live. But you're there in Ann Arbor, and the players, they come up in June, and then they're there until the school year ends in May. So, they live there 10, 11 months out of the year full time. Mm-hmm. So the culture of Ann Arbor, they are, even if it's Nico Collins from rural Alabama, he is really a resident of Ann Arbor pretty much year round. The culture around the program, the people they interact with, do you think there's a certain, like what Golden Tate talked about when he came from the Seahawks to the Lions, the minute something goes wrong and everybody just kind of looks at each other and says, here we go again. Do you think that there is a culture that's sort of creating a feedback loop for these players? And so when they get out there and they're wearing those white uniforms, they hear this all week long, all year long. And the minute the road team gets even a little bit, and maybe we probably in hindsight should have given Pat Fitzgerald more credit. He's one of the better coaches in the Big Ten. He knew that coming off a bye, that they could not afford to lose 3 straight home games. And they always play tough against us anyway, right? You just had Devin Gardner on your show talking about 4 years of Northwestern playing us tough. He beat us twice as a player, so we probably should give them more credit than we are. But are we creating this feedback loop for these players where we're causing the David Duvall, the sphincter puckering, when we get on the 18th hole of Augusta and looking at that 10-foot putt, and it looks like it's about 10 miles away. You know what I'm saying?
No, and I honestly think that there is some truth to that. I think when you're in, not necessarily being in Ann Arbor, but I think like every press conference that they had prior to the Notre Dame game asked them about their road woes. press conferences before the Northwestern game. Hey, have you guys put this behind us? The whole thing. I mean, it gets talked about. It's articles in the Michigan Daily. It's sports talk radio if you decide to listen to us, which I doubt any of the players do. But yeah, that type of conversation circles around. It circles around in social media circles. And so even if these guys are steadfast in their confidence and they're like, hey, this is not going to be us. I mean, they're hearing about it all the time. And so I do think, if we look at human nature, I mean, if you hear something enough, it is only natural for that to penetrate a little bit and for it to seep in there. And, I laugh how many times where you say, like, quarterbacks, if I throw an interception, you got to block it out. A goalie gives up a bad goal, and they immediately say, like, hey, you got to have the mental fortitude to put that in the past. I mean, I'll talk to goalies many years later, and I'll say, hey, how was it like when you gave a bad goal? Oh, man, it took me, it would sit with me for 3 or 4 minutes until I made a big save. And, like, that's them being honest. When you're a player and you're in the thick of it, you're telling people all the time, well, yeah, I move on to the next play. I move on to the next play. But that's not how the brain works. I mean, you don't just immediately forget about things. We don't get to have instant amnesia, right, and just move on. I mean, we think about things and they dwell on us and they impact our very next play, whether we say that it does or not. And so I do think there is a little bit of that with this Michigan football team. They're going to be getting talked about it, and they're going to get talked about it before Michigan State, certainly. And so if you're going to have a cause for concern, I mean, that's going to be it. It's history keeps repeating itself because they keep on being inundated with this conversation. They got to win on the road. And so it's going to settle in there. They need to have a hot start against Michigan State. They need to come out and score on that first drive. They need to have a shutdown on that first drive, or else, it'll probably avalanche a little bit against them in East Lansing.
Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Good to see you, brother. Thanks for joining us again this week on Michigan Podcast.
Thank you, guys.
If you want to keep up with what we think about the Wolverines all week long, aside from when we're doing this for Michigan Podcast, check us out at WolverineDigest.com or Wolverine Maven, part of the Maven Network, WolverineDigest.com. Myself and Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor, we keep you up to date with our commentary all week long. And one of the really cool things I love about how this site works is that the sidebar there where we can give you, almost like a Mike Florio does at Pro Football Talk, where you can give you little mini updates via Twitter and other interactions, things that you probably want to know, be aware of, but don't require 500 to 700 word columns. I love that part of our website. It's a really easy, functional website to follow, WolverineDigest.com. So as Michigan heads into that October month that we all thought heading into this year would be the defining month of the season, we asked you on Twitter this week, what will Michigan's record in October be? Pretty split here between the top two options. 41% of you took the optimistic 3-0, and just under that, 39% of you said 2-1. And we want to thank the 5% of Ohio State and Sparty fans that voted 0-3 there. Good job out of you. Nice troll. Russian bots everywhere. Congratulate. This week's question of the week from Dane Zambalin. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Dane there in Richmond, Virginia, who says, can't we just soak in a win for a day? Depends on who the win's against, and it depends on how you won, right? I do think we should give the team more credit for the comeback. We haven't seen a lot of those. It's funny. I've seen 2 of the 3 greatest comebacks in Michigan football history. I was at those games. The first time was down 17-0 to Virginia in 1995 in the Pigskin Classic. And that last throw from Scott Dreisbach to Mercury Hayes in the corner of the end zone for the 18-17 win on the last play. And then I was there in Evanston, Illinois on Saturday for that game as well. So those aren't easy to do. We only have 3 17-point comebacks in the history of our program, because we haven't been down that much when you're the winningest program of all time. But still, those don't happen around here all the time. And I think the players deserve credit for that. And if you want to look for any glass half full thing, they found a way to win a game they have traditionally lost. And I think they deserve some credit for that. But again, when you look at the numbers, Dane, that I just laid out at the top of this show, barring rashes of injuries, particularly at quarterback, because I think the second string guy is pretty good too. So barring anything like what we saw last year occurring again, there really is no excuse for this team not to go into Columbus the last game of the year with a shot to win the Big Ten East Division title on the line. And if it doesn't do that, then it only has itself to blame because it kept shooting itself in the foot. You know, even little things. You get 2 field goals within 25 yards. You got to convert in the red zone. And I wanted to get all over the red zone play calling, and I agree with you guys. You know, we got 2 receivers that, you know, that are 6'3" or taller. We have a 6'7" tight end. How about a jump ball? I get that. Okay. But overall, when I went back and watched the game again, I didn't think the red zone play calling was that bad. You just got to execute, man. I mean, that's why you got a scholarship. Got to make plays. I go back to that Notre Dame game. Zach Gentry, you cannot allow a guy half your size to hand fight you for a football. You're bigger, stronger, faster. You got to make that play. So I think we're at the point now that the coaches have addressed the things we wanted them to address. And now it's time for the players to execute the way we need them to do so to break this decade-and-a-half nightmare of mediocrity that has really been a pall over the Michigan program. Well, thank you for watching us here this week on Michigan Podcast. I want to thank Michael Spath from WTKA for joining us. Thank you to our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to get the word out about what we do here each and every week. Thank you to all of you that subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher. If you have a moment to leave us a review, especially of 5 stars if you like us, that's great. We would appreciate it. Same thing for us here on YouTube. Give us some likes. Spread the word. I get comments all the time. Hey, why isn't your YouTube channel blowing up given the quality of your production here? Well, those of you in the audience can help that to happen by spreading the word about our YouTube channel here for Michigan Podcast as well. Follow us at Michigan Podcast on Twitter, WolverineDigest.com. We'll see you next week.